I'll be honest, if she hadn't gotten sick, none of this would have happened. The timing was perfect, really. 2 weeks in the hospital, hooked to machines, barely conscious. What were we supposed to do? Let that land rot under the sun while she lay there, doing nothing? No, we made a decision, a smart one. My father worked that soil his whole life, and when he died, he left it to her. Her, not us. As if all our sweat, all those summers baling hay meant nothing. I still remember that morning, the smell of damp earth after the rain, the realtor's SUV crunching over the gravel driveway. My wife Jenna was standing beside me, clutching the signed papers, her hands trembling. She's soft-hearted, always was. "Are you sure about this, Luke?" she whispered. "Your mother's going to be furious," I laughed. "She won't even notice. The doctors said she might not remember much for a while. Besides, we're family. This is still staying in the family." That's how I justified it. Every lie starts with a good reason, doesn't it? The farm had been falling apart for years, the old red barn sagging like a tired horse, the tractors rusting in the shed, the fences leaning toward the ground. She couldn't keep up anymore. What's the point of holding on to a dying dream when you can turn it into cash? And the offer was good. A developer from the city wanted to build vacation homes on the North Ridge. "You'll make enough to pay your debts and get a fresh start," he'd said, his tone smooth as whiskey. I imagined it: no more sleepless nights over bills, no more fixing that leaking roof, no more pretending that old farm still mattered. I remember signing my mother's name. My hand shook, but only for a second. The pen scratched across the page like a blade cutting through the past. I told myself it was mercy that selling the land would save us all from drowning. When we left the lawyer's office, I felt light, free. Jenna stayed quiet, staring out the window at the endless stretch of fields we no longer owned. The afternoon sun glared against the windshield, turning everything gold. It looked peaceful, almost holy. "You did the right thing," I told her. "She won't even know until it's too late to fight it." And that's exactly what I believed. I thought I'd outsmarted the world, that I'd finally taken control of what was rightfully mine. But that was before she came home, before I saw her standing in the doorway, frail, pale, and holding a letter that would burn everything I'd built to ashes. That's what my son said. She won't even know until it's too late to fight it. Those words echoed in my mind the morning I came home from the hospital, still weak, still clutching the discharge papers in my trembling hand. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I am 71 years old. For 43 years, my husband and I worked that land together. We planted corn, raised cattle, and built our life from the soil under our boots. That farm wasn't just a piece of property, it was the rhythm of our hearts, the song of every dawn we'd ever shared. And now, standing in front of it, I barely recognized what I saw. The old oak by the barn was gone. The wooden fence Henry had built with his own hands was torn down. The mailbox with our family name, Hayes Farm, Est 1978, was replaced with a shiny real estate sign that said, SOLD. For a moment, I thought maybe I was hallucinating, that the medication was playing tricks on my mind. But then I saw them, my son Luke and his wife Jenna, standing by their truck, papers in hand, avoiding my eyes. "Mom," Luke started, his voice steady but his eyes darting like a guilty boy caught stealing cookies. "You're home early. You should have called." I looked at him, my only child, the one I'd carried through droughts, debts, and the loss of his father. "Early?" I whispered. "You sold your father's farm while I was lying in a hospital bed." He sighed, the way young people do when they think they're smarter than time itself. "Mom, please don't make this harder. You can't handle the place alone anymore. The bills, the upkeep, it's too much for you. I'm doing this for your own good." My own good. I had heard that phrase so many times lately, from doctors, from nurses, and now from my own son. It's funny how "for your own good" always means without your permission. I felt the world tilt, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Did you even ask me?" I asked quietly. "Did you come see me, look me in the eye, and ask?" Jenna looked away. Luke clenched his jaw. "You were too sick to decide," he said finally. I had to act fast. The offer was good. The offer. That word stung more than any insult. My husband's ashes were buried behind that barn, under the lilac bush he planted for me on our 10th anniversary. That was where I still spoke to him on quiet mornings, asking him for strength. How could I explain to my son that selling the land was like selling what was left of Henry's soul? I wanted to scream, but my voice came out a whisper. You didn't sell land, Luke. You sold your father's promise. Oh. He turned away, muttering something about practicality. But I saw it then, a flicker of something he couldn't hide. Fear, maybe guilt, maybe the first crack in his certainty. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Henry and I had shared coffee every dawn. The house was cold, hollow, stripped of the laughter that once filled it. On the counter lay a single envelope with my husband's handwriting, old faded ink that somehow looked freshly alive under the light. It was addressed to me, and that letter, hidden away all these years, would become the spark that changed everything. Because Henry had seen this coming, and he had left me one final truth. I remember the first time I ever saw that stretch of land. It was late spring 1976, and the air smelled of rain and wild clover. Henry had just come back from his shift at the mill, his hands still rough with sawdust. He parked his old Chevy at the edge of the field, stepped out, and looked across the acres of rolling hills that shimmered gold beneath the setting sunday. This, he said, pointing toward the horizon, is where we'll build our life. I laughed back then, thinking it was another one of his wild dreams. We had only $200 in savings and a half-paid truck. But Henry was the kind of man who made things happen with bare hands and quiet faith. We married that summer in the small white church at the county crossroads. He wore a borrowed suit. I wore my mother's lace dress. And when the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," the smell of cut hay drifted through the open doors like a blessing. That farm was our first and only home. We started with a single cow, a few chickens, and a loan from the local credit union that nearly broke our backs. There were nights we ate nothing but beans and cornbread. But we were happy, so foolishly, blissfully happy. We built the barn ourselves, one board at a time. Every nail, every beam, every fence post held a story. Henry would whistle hymns while he worked, and sometimes he'd wink at me and say, "You keep that coffee hot, Maggie. I'm building us forever." We raised our boy Luke right there in that house. He took his first steps across the porch on a spring morning when the fields were heavy with dew. Henry picked him up, lifted him toward the sky, and said, "Someday, son, this land will be yours." I still remember the pride in his eyes. To Henry, that farm wasn't about money or property, it was about belonging, about roots that held us steady through every storm. We didn't have much, but we had enough. On summer evenings, we'd sit on the porch swing, our hands entwined, listening to the cicadas hum. Luke would chase fireflies in the yard, while Henry read the paper out loud, muttering about gas prices and weather forecasts. Every sound, every smell of those nights lives in me, still the creak of the wooden steps, the scent of kerosene from the lantern, the faint music from the old radio that never quite tuned right. Life had its hardships, droughts, bad harvests, and hospital bills, when Henry's back gave out after years of lifting hay bales. But never once did he talk about selling. "You don't sell your history, Maggie," he'd say. "You take care of it, and one day it takes care of you." When Henry passed, the farm went silent for a long time. The tractor was rusted by the shed. The animals were sold off one by one. Luke promised he'd help me keep the place running, but city life called him new job, new wife, new dreams. I understood. That's what mothers do, we let our children go. But I never imagined he'd come back, only to tear down what his father built. I think the distance began years before I noticed. It started with the way he stopped coming for Sunday dinners, then how his voice grew colder on the phone. "Mom, it's too far to drive," he'd say. Or, "I'll visit next month." But months turned into years, and the silence between us thickened like dust on the old family Bible. After Henry's death, I tried to keep busy. I planted wildflowers by the fence line, painted the porch, and even started baking pies for the church fundraisers. It wasn't the same, but it gave me purpose. The farm became my anchor, a living memory of the man I'd loved and the life we'd built. So when I walked through that door after the hospital and saw the walls stripped bare, I felt something inside me crumble. The air smelled different, sterile, empty. The photographs were gone from the hallway, the one of Henry holding newborn Luke, the one of our first harvest when we stood grinning in front of the old John Deere. Even the quilt on my bed, the one I'd sewn the winter Henry caught pneumonia, was missing. In its place, a box sat on the kitchen table with a note in Jenna's handwriting. "We started packing for you, Mom. Rest easy. Rest easy. I sat down hard in that wooden chair and pressed my hand against the table's surface. I could still see the tiny scratches Henry had made carving his initials there. Rest easy. How do you rest easy when your whole life has been erased in your absence? That night, I lit the kerosene lamp and read Henry's letter again, his handwriting crooked and faded but still firm. He had written it just weeks before his heart gave out. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, Maggie, it means I couldn't finish what I started." He spoke about the land, about legacy, about how some people forget what soil really means. He told me he'd put measures in place just in case. I staggered. At first, I didn't understand what that meant, but as I folded the letter and pressed it to my heart, I realized Henry had known. Somehow, even before he died, he'd seen this betrayal coming. And if my husband had left a warning, then somewhere out there was also a way to make things right. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as I always had. Habit, I suppose. The farm might have been stripped bare, but my body still remembered the rhythm of dawn. I stood by the kitchen window, holding my cup of black coffee, watching the fog drift across the empty fields where our cattle once grazed. It looked like ghosts walking the land. My husband used to say, "That mist's just the earth breathing, Maggie." But that morning it felt more like the earth was mourning. The letter from Henry sat folded on the counter beside me. I had read it 3 times already, and each time I found something new, something deliberate, almost coded. He mentioned the man in town who helped with the papers. At first, I thought he meant the lawyer who drafted his will years ago. But as I looked closer, he had written, "Trust what's already ours, and don't sign anything until you talk to John." John. My breath caught. He meant John Miller, Henry's old friend, the man who used to help him file the land taxes at the county office. John had retired years ago, but his daughter Emily worked as a clerk there now. Maybe that was what Henry wanted me to find. But before I could act, the front door opened without a knock. Luke stepped in like he owned the place. He wore a pressed shirt and city shoes that left sharp prints in the dust on the floor. "Mom," he said flatly, "we need to talk." I didn't turn around. "Seems like you've done enough of that without me." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, I'm trying to handle this peacefully. The sale is done. The buyers have already wired the money. You'll have your share once the paper's clear." "My share," I repeated softly. "And how much exactly is my share of my own husband's life?" He groaned, frustrated. "Don't start with that sentimental stuff again. Dad wouldn't have wanted you to—" I turned then, my voice steady but sharp. "Don't you dare speak for your father." He froze. For the first time, I saw him hesitate just a flicker, but it was enough. There was still a boy in there somewhere, buried under pride and fear. "Luke," I said, calmer now, "tell me something. Did you sign my name?" He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. My stomach turned cold. "Mom, you don't understand. The lawyer said we could expedite the process with a family authorization. You were unconscious. It was just a formality." "A formality?" My voice cracked. "Forging my name, selling the only thing your father ever loved, that's your idea of a formality?" He stepped closer, his tone turning defensive. "You're twisting this. I'm trying to save you. You can't take care of this place anymore. You almost died in that hospital. I can't lose you too." I studied him quietly. "You didn't save me, Luke. You saved yourself." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. I could see it now, the unpaid loans, the sleepless nights, the debt collectors. Jenna had probably pushed him into it. Maybe he thought selling the farm would fix everything. But there are some debts no amount of money can settle. "Where is Jenna?" I asked. "At home," he muttered. "She didn't want to upset you." "Smart woman," I said. "Because if she stood here now, I might forget my manners." He frowned. "You're angry, and I get that. But it's done. You can't undo it. They're bulldozing next week." The words hit me like a fist. Bulldozing. I could almost hear the sound of engines tearing through the soil where Henry and I once planted dreams. "Leave," I said quietly. "Mom." "Leave." He hesitated, then turned, muttering under his breath, "You'll thank me one day." When the door slammed, the sound echoed through the empty house like thunder. I sank into Henry's old chair and pressed the letter against my chest. For the first time since coming home, I let myself cry, not the quiet, controlled kind of tears, but the kind that tear through you, leaving nothing but truth behind. Later that afternoon, I gathered what little strength I had left and drove to town. The county office smelled of old paper and lemon polish, just like it always had. Emily looked up from her desk and gasped when she saw me. "Mrs. Hayes, I heard you'd been ill. How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I said, forcing a smile. "Emily, I need to ask you something about the deed to our farm." Her face shifted from warmth to confusion. "Oh, the Hayes property? That was transferred last week." I processed it myself. The signature looked odd, but your son brought a notarized authorization, said you'd approved it. My heart twisted. "Emily, if I show you something, can you tell me what it means?" I handed her Henry's letter. She read it slowly, her eyes widening as she reached the end. "Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, "your husband filed a secondary title trust before he passed. It's under a different parcel ID, technically. Part of the North Ridge isn't included in the sale. If that's true, the developer doesn't own all of it." My pulse quickened. "Can you prove it?" She nodded. "If you have the original trust papers, yes. It's still valid, but you'll need to find them fast before construction starts." I left the office with my heart pounding like a drum. The air outside was cold and sharp, but for the first time in weeks I felt alive. Somewhere out there, buried in the house Henry built, was my salvation. That night I searched every drawer, every chest, every old box in the attic. I found photographs, receipts, Henry's pocket knife, but no papers. I was about to give up when I noticed the floorboard beneath his side of the bed was slightly raised. I knelt, pried it open with trembling hands, and there it was, a faded envelope sealed with red wax, labeled Hayes Trust, Confidential. As I held it, I could almost hear Henry's voice again, calm and steady. "I built us forever, Maggie. Don't let them tear it down." The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, falling across the envelope like a quiet spotlight. For a long time I just stared at it, afraid to open it, as if doing so might summon Henry's voice for real. When I finally broke the seal, the scent of old paper and cedar rose, the smell of our life together. Inside were several folded pages, legal forms, a bank letter, and a handwritten note in Henry's neat, careful script. My heart tightened as I began to read. "If you are reading this, Maggie, it means things have gone wrong sooner than I hoped. You always believed people's hearts were better than their actions, but I've seen enough of this world to know otherwise. I've set things up to protect you and what we built. The land will pass to you through the Hayes Trust, not the primary deed. No one can sell what they don't legally own. Keep faith, and when the time comes, talk to attorney Charles Benton in Milford. He knows everything." I pressed my hand to my mouth. Henry had prepared for this, for betrayal, for greed, for exactly what Luke had done. He must have known somehow that the boy he raised would one day forget his roots. There was also a document from the county bank showing that Henry had consolidated the mortgage years earlier under the trust's name, not his own. Which meant the farm, at least a large part of it, was technically not tied to the title Luke had sold, and according to the law, fraud in signature and misrepresentation could void the sale entirely. I felt a shiver of strength run through me, thin but alive. For the first time since Henry's death, I didn't feel powerless. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside my cardigan pocket, close to my heart. The drive to Milford took almost an hour. The small town hadn't changed in years. Same diner, same faded gas station sign, same courthouse with its white columns standing proud against the autumn sky. I found Attorney Benton's office on Main Street, above the old post office. His secretary, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Doyle, recognized my name at once. "Oh, Mrs. Hayes," she said softly. "Mr. Benton told us to expect you someday. Please, come in." Inside, the lawyer's office smelled of leather and dust. Charles Benton himself looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. "Margaret," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I was hoping I'd never need to see you under these circumstances, but Henry always planned." I took a seat and slid the envelope across the desk. "They sold the farm, Charles. My son forged my name. I don't even know where to start." He nodded slowly, unfolding the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. "This," he murmured, tapping the trust deed, "is Henry's masterpiece. Your husband was smarter than people gave him credit for." The Hayes Trust holds a controlling interest in the northern and central acres, the part with the barn, the spring, and the house itself. The sale your son made only covers the southern lots, which your husband separated in 2009. Without your consent and the trust's approval, the buyer doesn't own the home or the main farmland. Legally, they can't build a single fence post there. I blinked back tears. Are you saying I still own the heart of it? He smiled faintly. More than that, you own the leverage. If the developer proceeds without your signature, they'll face a lawsuit for fraudulent acquisition and damages. And as for Luke, well, signing your name on legal documents is a crime. You could press charges. I looked down at my shaking hands. He's my son, Charles. Allah. Yes, he said quietly, but he stopped acting like one when he sold your future behind your back. The truth hit me harder than any betrayal. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to believe he'd been desperate, not cruel. But the sight of Henry's handwriting, the precision with which he'd prepared for this very moment, it all told me something else. My husband had trusted me to be stronger than pity. Charles slid a new set of papers toward me. This is a motion to freeze the sale temporarily. We can file it today. Once we do, the developer's bank will suspend the transaction until the trust is verified. I stared at the pen lying beside the form, the same kind of pen Luke had used to forge my name. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, but I didn't hesitate. I signed firmly, clearly, my real name this time. When it was done, I exhaled, a long, steady breath that felt like release. What happens next? Charles leaned back. We'll call a hearing next week. You'll need to testify. If all goes well, you'll get back everything your husband left you and a public record proving your son's fraud. Public record. That phrase lingered in the air like a quiet promise. For years, I had lived gently, privately, letting people walk over me. But now, for once, the truth would speak where I couldn't. On the drive home, the sky was streaked pink and gold. The sun dipped low over the hills, lighting up the fields that still belonged to me, even if no one else knew it yet. I stopped the car at the edge of the property and stepped out. The soil was cool under my shoes. I knelt, pressed my hand into the earth and whispered, "Henry, you clever man. You gave me the last word." As the wind brushed through the dry corn stalks, I could almost hear his laugh again, low, warm, certain. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, and when I woke, I knew exactly what I had to do. It was time to go back to court. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and rain that morning. I sat on the bench outside the hearing room, my hands folded neatly in my lap, a habit I'd carried from church pews and Sunday suppers. The papers Charles had prepared sat in a leather folder beside me. Every page bore my name, my real name this time, and every signature felt like a piece of myself stitched back together. When Luke walked through the doors, he looked almost unrecognizable. The confidence I used to see in him was gone, replaced by a kind of restless dread. He avoided my eyes, straightening his tie over and over. Jenna trailed behind him, whispering something that sounded like blame. They both looked smaller somehow, like the world had started closing in and they didn't know where to stand. "Mom," he said quietly as he approached, "you didn't have to do this. We could have settled this as a family." I met his eyes. "You should have thought about family before you sold ours." He flinched, and for once I didn't look away. There was a time when I would have softened, when I would have reached out, tried to comfort him. But that version of me had died the day I found the sold sign on Henry's land. The bailiff called our case. Inside, the courtroom was small and bright, the kind of place that echoed even the softest words. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She reminded me of my old-school principal, the kind of woman who saw straight through excuses. Attorney Benton rose first. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Margaret Hayes, is here to contest the unauthorized sale of her property. The transfer was executed using a falsified signature, and without the knowledge of the beneficiary of the Hayes Trust." Luke's lawyer stood, his voice too smooth. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes was incapacitated at the time. My client acted in good faith, believing he had her consent." The judge's brow lifted. "In good faith? Forging a signature and selling land that doesn't belong to you hardly qualifies as good faith." I could see Luke swallow hard. He shifted in his chair, his hand gripping the table's edge. For the first time, He looked at me not as a son speaking to his mother, but as a man facing the consequences of his own greed. Charles presented the documents one by one: the trust deed, Henry's letter, the bank certification, and finally the motion to freeze the sale. The developer's representative, sitting a few rows back, looked like he wanted to vanish into his suit jacket. When the judge asked me to speak, I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice didn't shake. "Your Honor," I said, "my husband and I worked that land our entire lives. We raised our son there. We built that home with our own hands. When my husband passed, he left protections in place because he knew how fragile people's hearts can become when money enters the picture. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth on record so that my husband's memory isn't sold off like a used tractor." The room went quiet. Even the air seemed to pause. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Hayes, the court thanks you for your honesty, and I assure you, the law will not allow deceit to stand." She turned to Luke. "Mr. Hayes, this court finds that the property in question was fraudulently transferred. The Hayes Trust remains in full control of the estate. You are hereby ordered to relinquish any claim, and the sale contract is null and void. Furthermore, the court will recommend a review for possible criminal charges regarding document forgery." Luke's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief, then desperation. "Mom, please. I didn't mean..." But I raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't," I said softly. "Not here." The judge's gavel struck, a sharp sound that felt like thunder splitting the air. Just like that, it was done. The same system that had once ignored people like me had finally listened. Henry's farm was safe. When I stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The sun was warm on my face, and the courthouse steps glistened with leftover rain. Reporters were gathering for another case nearby, their cameras flashing, but I ignored them. I just stood there, breathing in the scent of wet earth, the scent of home. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Luke. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was drowning. The bills, the house, everything. I thought selling it would fix it all." I turned, meeting his gaze. "There are some things you can't fix by selling, Luke. A home, a name, a father's promise." I'm straight. Tears welled in his eyes, but I saw no repentance, only regret for being caught. So I walked away. A week later, the bulldozers left. The sold sign came down, replaced by the old wooden one Henry carved 40 years ago. I spent the next days repairing the fence line, one post at a time. The air smelled of hay again, and the house felt less empty. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing with a cup of tea and watch the sun set behind the hills. Sometimes I thought of Luke and Jenna, living somewhere far away now. Maybe one day they'd understand what they lost. Maybe not. But justice had come quietly, like a sunrise slow, steady, inevitable. When the mailman delivered the official court papers confirming the reinstatement of the trust, I smiled. On the back of the envelope, I wrote just one sentence in my own handwriting before tucking it into Henry's old Bible. "You built us forever, Henry, and forever it will be." It's been 6 months since that day in court. The seasons have turned again spring, pushing gently through the frost, wildflowers painting the edges of the pasture in soft purples and whites. Life on the farm moves slower now, quieter, but every sound feels precious. The creak of the porch boards, the hum of crickets at dusk, the distant rumble of a tractor from a neighbor's field. I still wake up before sunrise. Old habits don't die, they just become prayers. I brew my coffee, pour it into Henry's chipped mug, and step outside to the porch where the horizon stretches wide and forgiving. The air carries that faint sweetness only spring mornings have the smell of wet soil, honeysuckle, and memory. Most mornings, I talk to Henry. Not out loud, not always. Sometimes it's just in my head, a conversation that flows as naturally as it used to when he was alive. I tell him about the garden I've started again, the new fence that Joseph from down the road helped me repair, and the stray cat that insists on sleeping in the barn. I imagine his chuckle, the warmth in his eyes, and it fills the silence like sunlight. Luke hasn't come back. He sent one letter short, polite, careful. He said he and Jenna moved to another state, that they're rebuilding. He didn't mention the farm or the court or forgiveness, and that's all right. Some wounds take more than apologies to heal. Maybe time will teach him what words never could. The neighbors know what happened, of course. In a small town, truth travels faster than lies. Some stop by with pie or flowers, their eyes soft with sympathy. Others just wave from their trucks when they pass the gate, as if acknowledging not just the victory but the quiet dignity of surviving it. I appreciate both gestures equally. Last Sunday, after church, Pastor Williams stopped me at the door. "You've carried a heavy burden, Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "but I think the Lord was watching over you the whole time." I smiled. "He always does, Pastor. Sometimes he just lets us find our own way to the truth first." That night, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, I walked down to the lilac bush by the barn, the one under which Henry's ashes rest. The flowers had begun to bloom again, their scent thick in the evening air. I knelt beside them, brushing a petal between my fingers. "You were right, Henry," I whispered. "You said a home isn't just walls and dirt, it's the promise behind it. And no one can take that from us." A breeze stirred the branches, scattering a few blossoms across the ground. For a moment, they shimmered in the fading light, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, deep and certain. As I walked back to the porch, fireflies began to flicker in the fields, tiny lanterns carrying the memory of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. I sat in the swing, the old wood rocking gently beneath me, and watched the stars appear one by one. Some things can be sold: a field, a house, even a legacy. But love roots itself too deep. It endures drought and storm, betrayal and time. It survives. And as long as this porch still faces the dawn, Henry's promise and my own will live on. If you've stayed with me till the end, tell me, what would you have done if the people you loved most betrayed your trust? And don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Rose for more stories where justice finds its quiet way home.